Thanks, everybody, for being here. I'm Senator Alyssa Slotkin from the great state of Michigan, and we are here to introduce the Protect Our Polls Act. What this bill does, essentially, is shut off avenues that President Trump can use to send our military in uniform or federal law enforcement to intervene in our elections. I want to thank my colleagues who are behind me, Senator Padilla, who heads up a lot of our election work, but then Senators Baldwin, Gallego, Kelly, and Klobuchar, who aren't here, Rosen, Warnock. We made the decision to include as original co-sponsors those of us from swing states, from states that have been targeted for our voter rolls, for states that are right now being sued by the Trump administration for our voter rolls, and where President Trump has shown a bit of an oppressive or obsessive focus on our elections in particular. It's an important signal that we're doing this together. For some of us, we've already seen this movie, and I think we were debating, I think all of us were here on January 6, 2021. So just to review the bidding and why this bill has come together now, in May of 2020, so months and months before the 2020 elections, Trump was already talking about his lack of confidence and fraud in the upcoming 2020 elections. He said for the first time in May of 2020 that if he didn't win in 2020, then the elections were rigged. And members of Congress, members of the House and the Senate, wrote strongly worded letters. We said things on TV. But to be honest, I think we had a failure of imagination to really understand what this president would do in reality. Obviously, he lost in 2020. And the next thing we all knew, we were here on January 6th, many of us on the floor of the House, on the floor of the Senate, and in the case of myself, barricading myself in my office because of the attack on the Capitol. So I think, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. And what we have done today is an attempt to try and curtail the president's ability to send uniformed military or federal law enforcement to our polls. In the last 6 months alone, the president has said that the 2020 elections were rigged over 100 times, including just this week. In the State of the Union, where we were all sitting on the House floor, he said again, if my side doesn't win in November of 26, then the elections were rigged. Back in 2020, I will take note, he drafted an executive order that called on the National Guard to seize ballots and voting machines in purple states, including the state of Michigan. He did not sign that executive order, but in January of this year, regretted that he didn't sign that executive order. He told a journalist, I wish I had sent in the uniformed military to collect ballots back.
A New York Times reporter asked. He reminded Trump that he did not sign an executive order calling for sending the National Guard to seize ballots in Michigan in 2020. Trump's response? He didn't deny it. On the contrary, I should have signed it. This sentence was said in January 2026, and months later on June 18, 2026, 8 Democratic senators gathered on Capitol Hill and introduced a concrete bill to prevent this sentence from happening again, the Protect Our Polls Act. This is not a fictional scenario. Trump has made the claim that the election was rigged at least 107 times in the last 6 months, repeating it at least once a day. He tried to seize ballots in Georgia, Michigan, and Arizona. He sued the voter rules in 30 states, and he did not rule out sending troops or law enforcement to polling places during the midterm elections. Senator Mark Kelly, a former Marine, said, "As a Marine, I swore an oath to the Constitution, not to a president. All service members did. All the soldiers did the same." The starting point of this crisis is hidden in an interview conducted in January 2026. In an interview with the New York Times in January, the president did not dispute reports that he considered deploying the National Guard to seize ballot boxes during the 2020 election, which he falsely claims to have won. I should have signed it, Trump said. He also did not rule out doing it in an upcoming election, but questioned whether the National Guard was advanced enough to meet such a request. This answer was not an abstract threat. It was a clear regret of a past draft of an executive order. Trump prepared a draft executive order to send the National Guard to seize election ballots and voting machines in December 2020, but said he should have signed it in January. This statement is not just a regret about the past. At the same time, it was a harbinger of a future intention. To understand the true scale of this crisis, one needs to look at the list of evidence compiled by Slotkin. This is not an isolated incident. It is the result of a series of threats that have been accumulating for months. In the past 6 months, Trump has repeated the claim of fraudulent elections almost every day, at least 107 times. He tried to seize ballots in Georgia, Michigan, and Arizona. He sued the voter rules in 30 states, and he did not rule out sending troops or law enforcement to polling places during the midterm elections. The 8 political appointees' failure to explicitly reject the possibility of sending soldiers or law enforcement to polling places in their statements to the press or during congressional hearings, and the president's not completely ruling out such a step during the midterm elections on May 12, have further fueled the debate. Additionally, the president argued on February 1st that Republicans should standardize election processes at the national level in at least 15 states, and 2 days later reiterated that the federal government should take a more direct role in state elections. This picture was not just a single statement or interview, it was considered part of a broader pattern that had accumulated over months and was supported by various statements. The legal dimension of the crisis had its first concrete test in a committee vote. Republican members of the Senate Armed Services Committee blocked a Democratic proposal on Thursday that would have strengthened existing legal prohibitions against sending federal troops to polling places or seizing ballots or voting machines. This development showed that the debate over election security and the limits of federal authority was continuing not just at the level of political rhetoric, but also in the legislative process. Senator Elissa Slotkin, D. Michigan, said, "I offer these amendments to protect our free and fair elections from military intervention. It is extremely concerning that none of my Republican colleagues voted to include this. None of my Republican colleagues voting to include this is extremely concerning." Senator Richard Blumenthal said he feared the party line vote was a sign that Trump and his Republican allies would try to use federal troops to influence the outcome of the midterm elections. This committee vote was an attempt to integrate the law into the National Defense Authorization budget process. Slotkin proposed an amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act that would prohibit the use of any funds to deploy federal troops for the purpose of seizing ballots, voting registrations, voting machines, or other election materials. After that amendment failed, she proposed a second amendment requiring Congress to be notified of any deployment of troops to polling places, the only exception to the blanket federal ban on using troops to suppress insurrections in the U.S. This second, more modest amendment was also rejected. Following the committee-level rejection, 8 Democratic senators took direct action with a bill. A group of Democratic U.S. senators led by Michigan Senator Elissa Slotkin hopes to limit the potential presence of armed military personnel or federal law enforcement at polling places. Slotkin and 7 other lawmakers launched the initiative on Thursday. Slotkin said, "President Trump is saying the quiet part out loud. He wants to undermine our elections in every way possible, and he doesn't shy away from sending uniformed military to polling places or seizing ballots and voting machines. Our laws prevent President Trump from turning our military and armed federal officers into weapons to interfere in our elections. Our law prevents President Trump from turning our soldiers and armed federal officers into weapons to interfere in our elections." The summary of the Protect Our Polls Act states that the law will apply to any attempt to send federalized National Guard, active duty military personnel, Federal Bureau of Investigation, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or other federal law enforcement agencies to polling places or to seize election materials. This is an extremely comprehensive legal protection framework. It covers not only the military, but all federal law enforcement agencies, including ICE. One of the strongest advocates of this bill was Senator Ruben Gallego, a former Marine. Gallego said, "As a Marine, I swore an oath to the Constitution, not to any president. All service members take the same oath. Using service members to intimidate Americans at polling places is both disgusting and illegal, and this law is specifically aimed at preventing such abuse," he said. This statement directly aligned with the message Obama emphasized in his inaugural address, that the military is bound to the Constitution, not to any leader. Gallego was also embodying the same principle through his own military experience and the oath he took. Senator Mark Kelly, on the other hand, addressed the issue within the framework of a more direct democratic principle. Kelly said, "Free and fair elections are the foundation of our democracy." He stated, "The idea of a president sending soldiers or armed officers to polling places to intimidate voters is both incompatible with American values and illegal." Kelly's approach was consistent with the stance he had previously taken in various hearings. He was trying to clearly define the legal boundaries and was focused on conducting the discussion through the existing legal framework rather than political rhetoric. The White House has put forward its own alternative framework to the bill. White House spokeswoman Abigail Jackson reiterated the president's desire for the Senate to pass the Save America Act, which would comprehensively review U.S. elections and require voters to show photo ID before casting their ballots. Jackson told NBC News, "If Democrats were really interested in securing our elections, they would pass the Save America Act, which includes common-sense election integrity measures supported by a large majority of Americans." This answer does not address the specific question Democrats are asking, the issue of deploying troops and federal law enforcement to polling places. Save America Act addresses a completely different issue, such as voter ID. The interesting aspect of this crisis was that there were some reactions from Trump's own party. Earlier this year, Trump had said in a podcast interview that Republicans should nationalize the vote in at least 15 places. Later, in an NBC News interview, the president pointed to cities in Georgia, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, all battleground states, and said Republicans should seize control of their election systems. His comments drew ire from local officials of both parties in those states. Senate Majority Leader John Thune, RSD, also objected to the idea of federalizing elections following the president's remarks. This is a very important detail. The Senate's top Republican broke with his own president's nationalizing the election rhetoric, but that objection did not translate into concrete support in a committee-level vote. The supporters of this bill were chosen with a very specific geographical logic. Slotkin said, "I am thrilled to be with senators from all over the country, especially from states like Arizona, Georgia, Minnesota, and Wisconsin, all the states the president is targeting along with Michigan, all states that can decide who controls the House and the Senate, all states that can decide who will control the House and the Senate." Senator Alex Padilla, highlighting his role on the Senate Rules and Administration Committee and his experience as California's Secretary of State, joined Senators Elissa Slotkin, Tammy Baldwin, Ruben Gallego, Mark Kelly, Amy Klobuchar, Jackie Rosen, and Raphael Warnock in introducing the Protect Our Polls Act. This list did not appear to be a randomly formed coalition because all states like Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Nevada have been among the critical battlegrounds determining the fate of Congress and presidential elections in recent years. The historical dimension of this debate showed how long federal legal regulations have been in place. Padilla stated, "The right to vote also includes the ability of citizens to cast their votes without harassment, threats, or intimidation. There is no place for federal troops or federal law enforcement, including ICE, at polling places. Their deployment to intimidate voters is already illegal, and this principle has been a part of American law since the Civil War," he said. Padilla went further, stating, "However, we have seen that Donald Trump and his administration did not show enough respect for the rule of law. Therefore, we need the Protect Our Polls Act. Thus, Congress can prevent a president from using federal power to intimidate voters or interfere with the electoral process," he stated. This approach framed the discussion not only as a continuation of current politics, but also of a legal tradition spanning nearly 160 years. However, the fundamental issue emphasized by Padilla was that the mere existence of such a ban on paper might not be sufficient. The real question was how effectively these protections would be implemented. The entire story hinged on a single sentence: "I should have signed it." Trump expressed regret for not signing a draft executive order in 2020. This order would have used the National Guard to seize ballots. This confession is not an abstract speculation, the president's own words. Slotkin summarized the list of evidence as follows: 107 instances of fraud claims, attempts to seize ballots in Georgia, Michigan, and Arizona, lawsuits in 30 states, the inability of 8 political appointees to say, "I won't send them." This pattern faced a Republican rejection at a committee level. Then 8 Democratic senators directly offered a legal protection framework. Gallego's words capture the essence of this struggle. "As a Marine, I swore an oath to the Constitution, not to a president." It is uncertain whether this bill will pass in the Senate, but one thing is certain: this debate is not a purely theoretical concern, a concrete crisis created by a documented intention from the president's own words. If you want to follow such developments, subscribe and don't forget to turn on notifications. See you in the next analysis.